So, Tashi Delay, welcome everybody, and we are back with our practice and teachings related to the heart essence of Tibetan Buddhism. This is class number 18 in the sequence. It's a little off from the original syllabus. We've modified things a bit as we've moved along. So anyway, welcome back. And please turn off any audio systems that you have if you're watching. And then we'll begin by taking a deep breath and then slowly letting it out, just with the calming of your mind and body into deep peace. And from that state, then, we take refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. I take refuge with the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. So now we're continuing in chapter 14. With some rituals that I think are important for us to know, recognizing, however, that the Buddha himself historically rejected some of these kind of things. So they can be very helpful and meaningful to us as a part of that, but we need to be careful about focusing on them as the goal, the primary experience, which is not what we are after, but they can be helpful to us in that regard. So we're going to be looking at the mandala, drums and bells, some blessings, the Ganachakra or Tsok Feast, and smoke offerings or Pujas. And so those things toward the end of the chapter are the topics for today. So first, we look at the mandala. Each Yidam is also has a mandala. We've looked at some pictures of some of those individuals with respect to them and the mandalas representing them. So manda in Sanskrit means essence, and la means to hold or uphold. So the mandala is the ground that holds the essential qualities, or taken together, it means a complete circle. So they tend to be formed as circles. So there are some exceptions to that. It represents the abode of the Yidam and his or her retinue. So there's other images that can be a part of that. Mipham Rinpoche says the natural mandala of the ground refers to the primordial divine nature of the world and its inhabitants, and support and the supported. So when we generate the support, we are visualizing the mandala. And in addition to that, a picture of the Yidam. And so I brought another picture of a Yidam here you could look at. This is a typical this is a statue picture, but gives an idea of the kind of view that we have with the individual, and then oftentimes the flames around the outside that we talked about before. And then it's helpful to obtain a picture of the mandala for this purpose. And so I also brought a copy of the mandala here so that you could look at that and see how that might look. And so we have her in the center here, not real clear, but then the other figures around the outside edges of that as well. And there's several different layers of that. You could probably see if I can get it here. Okay. Around the outside and intermediate and different levels. And so depending on the figure, there may be a number of those, or there may be few, if any. There are different approaches to these. And so then it represents the ground and environment of the Yidam, including the palace viewed from above, although there are three-dimensional versions as well. And then there are also some other forms of mandala. We created an offering mandala in the preliminary practices. The body is also visualized as a mandala. And you can find sources that articulate a point-by-point comparison between the body mandala and the support mandala. So here's another picture for you to look at here. We'll put it on the other side. This is the body. And you can see carefully, if I can get it up close to you, the various numbers that are a part of the system that you can see there. And so those represent individual aspects of the body that are connected with this body mandala. In general, the body mandala includes the enlightened body, speech, and mind. And those are related to the body, speech, and mind of the Yidam, himself or herself. All mandalas embody the entire meaning of ground, path, and fruition. So that's a brief description of the mandala, and all of the figures have some form of a mandala that represents symbolically other characteristics and qualities and so forth related to that particular Yidam. So they're very important in the custom related to the teachings of this in this aspect of Tibetan Buddhism. So now we're going to move on to the next category, which are the drums and the bells. So Tantric Dharma practices are often established with a variety of ritual objects. And we use a lot of those kind of things. The Buddha didn't use those kind of things and tended to reject the use of those kind of things. So, but we have to deal with that. Again, just like the mandala, it can be symbolic and it can be representative in a way that can help us and benefit us as a part of that. So the most common are the use of a small hand drum or dharmaru as a part of that. I had one here. So this is called the dharmaru. And so it looks like this. It's fairly small. It has a couple of little pieces coming down that form the noise. So those are typical kinds of things that we might do with the dharmaru as a part of the ritual aspects of this. And then the bells. Usually the bells would be an individual one. I don't have one within grasp there right at the moment. But you've seen the bells that we have used before, and oftentimes in the texts you will get a written description of reciting or ringing the bells or those kind of things as a part of the text. But you also may not. Sometimes the texts don't include those kinds of things. They're not things that are required, but they are things that are very customary and very common in the symbolic ritual in Tibetan Buddhism. So below here is, in the text, is a very short guideline for their use. First, the drum is held in the right hand and the bell in the left. When using a vajra, it replaces the drum in the right hand. So they hold it in different ways. So most practices do not specify when to use the bell or drum. And one of my Dzogchen teachers, Tsok Rinpoche, gave me the following general guidelines on when to use these. So they may be listed in the text, but not always, as I mentioned. So there's 5 specific categories here. The first one is when you invite the Yidam, you use both. And so that's where, as a part of the text, we recite and invite them to come in and participate with us. And then the second one is when the Yidam bestows blessings, which, again, we use both of those. And so typically in a text, these would be more complex texts than really concise times of ones that we might be using for practice. And so when we do this, they give us blessings as a part of that. Then we would do the drums and bells. And then when you make offerings to the Yidams, the bell is usually enough in that case, no drums. And then when making praises, that's another aspect of this, then we use the bell as a part of that. And the last one, when the Yidams are delighted or pleased, which is a phrase that often shows up in text, the more elaborate texts at least, then we use the drum part of that. So when using the bell and not the drum, we hold the vajra in your right hand. When using a concise daily practice sadhana, only the bell. However, it's often customary to use both the bell and drum at the completion of the practice itself. And so when we get to the end, we do a dedication, and at the end of the dedication, then we do both the bell and the drum. And so those are some of the ritual things. You don't, as I said, have to have those, but they can be a nice addition to the sensation of the actual practice itself. The next category that we are going into today is blessings. So we can do blessings of various kinds of things. For example, we can bless malas that we might have. So we have a mala, a new mala. It's customary to do a blessing of a mala. Or prayer flags that you might have. We have some prayer flags hanging outside here. I have some other in the backyard behind our house. And so people like to put them up. They even put them up on the inside sometimes. But when you put them up, that's a good time also to be able to do a blessing of those prayer flags. And then meals are a third one. When you have a meal, it's often customary to recite some kind of a blessing related to the meal itself. So let's take a look at those, how you do that, because you can do it. It's often customary with a mala to take it to a lama and ask them for a blessing of it, and so they will often do that. But you can do it yourself. It doesn't have to be someone else doing that for you. So these prayers that we're going to look at are for the common purposes that you may find helpful in your practice. So some will ask the Lama, as I mentioned, for these, but it's not always possible, nor is it necessary, though it can be a nice way to connect with your Lama. So blessing the new mala. So holding it in your hands, in the palm of your hand, you just wrap it together into the palm of your hands as a part of that, and then you blow on it. And then the next part is to recite, and this is the emptiness mantra, which you've seen in some of the practice things that we've already done. Om Swabhava Shuddha Sarvadhamma Swabhava Shuddha Ham. And we typically do that 3 times. Om Swabhava Shuddha Sarvadhamma Swabhava Shuddha Ham. Om Swabhava Shuddha Sarvadhamma Swabhava Shuddha Ham. And then we blow again, rub it again between our palms, and it's ready to go. So that's one of the most common things that we see or do for people as a part of that. The next one are the prayer flags. They can be relatively small. They can be actually quite massive as a part of that. But usually we would use smaller versions of that, depending on the location where we're putting it and so forth. Sometimes we take a string of them and tie it to another string and another string so they can be tied up across wide openings as a part of that. And so the process for doing this, there's a short little verse that we recite as a part of it. And first of all, you tie one end of the string at one location, and then holding the flags up as a part of that, the string, then we recite, as wind carries our prayers for earth and all life, may respect and love light our way. May our hearts be filled with compassion for others and ourselves. May peace increase on earth, and may it begin with me. may have heard that line before. That's a fairly common line. And so then, having done that, that's the verse, then we tie the remaining end, lifting the flags up into the sky, if you will. Okay? So that's kind of a nice little ritual to have as a part of this. As I pointed out in the beginning, the Buddha thought the main reason that the Buddha rejected these kind of things is that he felt people become too attached to them. And that's not the idea here. The idea is that it creates a meaningful experience for us, but it's not something that we're locked into, that we have to have or have to do and so forth. The next one are food blessings with our hands together in the Tibetan or English, folding them together in this way, not flat, but open a little bit, like a lotus bud is the symbolism here. And this is a food blessing when you're having a meal or about to have a meal. With the hands together, we cite this in either Tibetan or English. I learned it originally in Tibetan, and so I tend to do it that way. But you can do it either way. So let me read it to you in terms of Tibetan, and then I'll read it slowly. And then you can also do it if you prefer in English, and I'll read it through in English. So Tampa Lame Sangye Rinpoche, Chopa Lame Damcho Rinpoche, Drimpa Lame Gendun Rinpoche, Kyabne Gonchak Sumla Chopar Bu. So that's the Tibetan version. So 4 lines. 4 lines are very common in the structure of Tibetan texts. Occasionally they're more or less, but that's the kind of standard, if you will. In English, what that means is the unsurpassable Lama is the precious Buddha. The unsurpassable protector is the precious Dharma. The unsurpassable guide is the precious Sangha. To the 3 unsurpassable jewels, I make this offering. So it's a very nice little verse, whether you do it in the Tibetan or you do it in English. Or there's another one that Khenchen Lama Rinpoche taught me, just Om Ah Hong Ho. Okay, repeat it 3 times and do it that way. Oftentimes I will do the verse and then I will go ahead and Om Ah Hong Ho, Om Ah Hong Ho, Om Ah Hong Ho as a part of that. But you can, that's a simple way to do that and recognize that as kind of a symbolic gesture to the value of receiving that meal. And it can be the generosity of somebody giving to us, or it can be something that we have paid for and prepared and all of those kind of things. It doesn't really matter. It's an important aspect of what we are doing with our lives. We have to eat. Okay. So the next one then is the Ganachakra or Tsok Feast. This is one that is more of a ceremonial kind of an activity than the ones we just looked at. And so there's 2 of these parts. They are very commonly done, for example, New Year's. The New Year's celebration that is a part of Tantra, which is the Tibetan calendar, which usually the New Year comes up late in January or probably more likely in February. So it's based on the cycle of the moon, not the sun. And so that is one of the things that we do, and we'd have a feast as a part of it. When we do these things, we'll usually do it as a feast as a potluck. And we have everybody bring food and we share that together. So this Ganachakra or Tsok Feast, there's many elaborate versions of the highest yoga Tantra practices that include a Ganachakra, which Ganachakra refers to the tantric gathering or feast involving group practice, just to get an idea of that, or it's also referred to as a Tsok Feast. Mipham Rinpoche, one of the great masters of Tibetan Buddhism, explains it this way. A gathering of fortunate individuals collects a gathering of precious materials and offers this to the gathering of Yidams. Yidams are invited in as a part of this, that are being accomplished thereby perfecting the gathering of merit and wisdom. So this is something that is happening in our mind, just like when we're doing Yidam practices. We visualize something happening, but it's happening in our mind. And so we have this gathering, and as a process of this, there is a sense of merit and wisdom that is a part of this, because we're offering this to various Yidams, usually in one form or another, or there's some generic forms. We'll look at one of those here in a moment. And so that is a part of this process. So they may be simple or very extensive as practices. In general, we tend to go with very simple kinds of practices, as detailed in the main practice itself. And so the Tsok Feast may also be included as a part of an empowerment, an extended, especially multi-day session, or special days in the Tibetan calendar, such as the New Year, Losar that I mentioned, or the 4 great festivals called Duchins. We've got another one of those coming up here at the end of May. And other events as well. The Buddha, even though he rejected these kind of celebrations, Tibetans actually had over 50 of these kind of things going on throughout their year. So they enjoyed those kind of things, but you can enjoy them a little too much as well. You get too locked up in the ritual and the ceremony and that kind of thing, which takes away from the underlying purpose. As a tantric practice, this may have included otherwise forbidden food and drinks, such as meat and alcohol, or symbolic representations of those. As part of its early origin in India, the main ritual of small tantric cult groups was to practice outdoors in the forest, in cremation grounds, or other scary places. In a book, The Passionate Enlightenment, Miranda Shaw describes these practices as follows. We don't know exactly how or what was done, but this is one version of that from Miranda. The feast is an esoteric ritual that unfolds in many stages. The sacred space for the ceremony is demarcated by geometric signs drawn on the ground with powdered pigments. So that's one of the ways. We don't tend to do that, but that's one of the ways, the colored things that they make these basically picture type effects on the ground. And an elaborate array of offerings and foods are laid out. That's the part that we tend to focus on. The participants don special insignia like bone ornaments and crowns and use musical instruments of archaic design for inducing heightened awareness. Practitioners sit in a circle and partake in the sacramental, which is dry meat and wine, often liquor is used, served in skull cups. So we've looked at that. I showed you a skull cup before. These days, very rare that we would use an actual skull cup. You'd have one made out of some kind of plastic or metal. The feasts also provide an occasion for the exchange of ritual lore, ritual worship of women, and the performance of sexual yogas. So some of the sexual yoga things in the tradition were included as a part of these. That's not part of what we do today, but that's in this story here. The feast culminates in the performance of tantric dances and music that must never be disclosed to outsiders. So this was very secret kind of things. We talk about tantra as being secret. This is a good example of that. The revelers may also improvise songs of realization to express their heightened clarity and blissful raptures in spontaneous verse. So that gives you a hint at some of the early understandings of Buddhism in India and in this form, this tantric type form of Buddhism in India. So participants would sit, that's the end of her quote there. Participants would sit as yidams and consorts in one or more circles forming a mandala around the guru and the consort as described by the Tantra. However, by the second dissemination of Buddhism into Tibet around the 11th century, so we're talking here, first would be about the 8th century, and the second one would be about the 11th century. Such practice was generally considered inappropriate for most, if not all, practitioners, especially monastics. As such, it has been replaced with much tamer ritual conducted indoors, usually without meat and little, if any, alcohol, and use of a visualized consort, so a picture of a jnana mudra, in place of the actual consort, which is a karma mudra. Although there are rare exceptions, most notably for yogi and yogini householders, tea, wine, or other alcohol may be symbolically transformed into nectar, with addition of medicine pills called dutsi, representing the 5 meats and the 5 nectars. So it's done very ritualistically, symbolically these days. Dancing, sexual yogas, and so forth are rarely included and only done in secret if they are done at all. So it's one of the reasons that I include those references in here is a lot of people are curious about those kind of things, but also to show how it has transitioned. And we don't tend to do those in that way. There are some lineages that still do, but it's very uncommon these days. Nevertheless, group practice such as Ganachakra or Tsok is considered to multiply the effectiveness of the practice by the number of participants. So if we have 10 people, then it multiplies it 10 times. The prayers, mantras, and other texts help create a sacred outlook of pure view of the mandala during the practice to enhance the experience and blessings of the teacher as Yidam. So we symbolically look at the teacher as being the Yidam in this practice. That's a very core part of what we do in Tibetan Buddhism, is recognizing the value, the importance of the teachers as a part of that. And so samsara and nirvana are united as one taste. Below this is a very concise version from the great master Mipham Rinpoche. This is a very concise kind of a version of the practice. He calls it the concise feast offering. And so I'm going to, again, read the text, and then I'll go back and go through line by line or piece by piece and give the commentary on that. So it begins with Om Ahung Ho, the one that we talked about a little bit ago. So Om Ahung Ho, purification, and then with this, bless the substances for the feast offering. The gurus, dewas, and dakinis all come now for this Ganachakra feast, outer, inner, and secret great bliss. Are the Ganachakra offerings I make. All impairments and breakages of samaya I confess. Duality, enemies and obstructors, liberate them into dharmadhatu. Then may your wisdom mind, the great bliss of equality, be delighted. Please grant me attainments ordinary and supreme. So again, it's just a short little text, but it helps us embody that kind of thing and the experience related to it. So I'm going to go back through it now and add a little commentary on this. So the Om Ahung Ho refers to purification and empowerment of body, speech, and mind, symbolizing the blessing of the enlightened body, speech, and mind of all Buddhas. Sometimes just Ho is recited. We hear it's at the end of that, but sometimes they just say Ho. With this, bless the substances, the food, for the feast offering. gurus, who are the teachers, the devas, who are the divine beings, the kinis, symbolizing the feminine principle of wisdom or insight, excuse me, all come to this Ganachakra feast. So we're asking them, we're inviting them. Outer, inner, and secret great bliss. These are the three levels of experience in the Tibetan Buddhist highest Yoga Tantra. They represent a progression from external sensory pleasure, and then the outer to the inner cultivation of the energetic joy. So that's the inner part. And then finally, the non-dual realization of bliss emptiness. That is referred to as the secret part of this, and which transcends all subject-object duality. So these are, going back to the actual text, are the Ganachakra offerings that I make. Okay, so you see all the symbolism involved in that simple little statement. Then all impairments and breakages of samaya, various commitments and vows that we make, I confess, duality, enemies and obstructors, liberate them into Dharmadhatu. So Dharmadhatu means ultimate reality. It's the true fundamental nature of mind, non-dualistic and pure, that is free from emotional defilements and dualistic thoughts. For example, subject and object would be dualistic, self and other would be dualistic. That is, all of reality is interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. So we don't divide them into pieces. We look at them in terms of how they are interrelated. So, excuse me. May your wisdom mind, the great bliss of equality, be delighted. Please grant me attainments, ordinary and supreme. So ordinary here are the common powers, the term used to aid in the path of liberation, but often considered today to be hypothetical or myth and magic due to a lack of evidence, but may be more pragmatic actions, such as curing illness, increasing insight, mastering our mind, and overcoming obstacles. And supreme is full liberation from all sufferings, asserting that we can control all things. One issue that comes up as a part of this, because the text tends to refer to that we can actually cure everything. Okay. The reality from a scientific point of view is that that's actually not the case. Now, we may think of them as being purified in some way, but that doesn't mean that they are actually stopped. Just it's a mental kind of an expression, which is characteristic of Tibetan Buddhism. And so this idea of supreme is the full liberation from all sufferings, asserting that we can control all things. But according to science, only 40% is within our control. 10% is partially supported, some accidents, illnesses, and things like that we don't have control over, or we may have some control over. But 50% is beyond our control. Things like earthquakes and hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and wars and climate change and lots of other things as well. So in this time, excuse me, we need to be aware of the fact that there are some of those things that we don't have total control over. The way that we understand them and view them, we may have some control over at that level, but it's not the same as saying, stop a hurricane or something like that. That's not what we were able to do. Okay, so that is that short, concise text. And then we go to the smoke offering or puja. The easiest way to do a puja is using incense. Lighting it at the beginning, and then some recite Ram Yam Kam 3 times, Ram Yam Kam, Ram Yam Kam, Ram Yam Kam, before lighting it, a symbolic purification of that with that verse, and then Omahong, 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 also 3 times, upon actually lighting it as a prayer as a part of that. So some versions are very elaborate with extensive liquid and solid ingredients added to a fire once the initial burning settles down, but that's beyond this text. We're doing things here that are very simple that we can all easily do. But there are these customs where you build up a really hot fire and then you start putting all of these different ingredients on top of it, and the smoke billows up as an offering and so forth. And they can be fun, but don't get attached to them. Okay? So here again is a text also from Mipham Rinpoche, very concise version. I like to use this one a lot for these kind of things. Ho, with this smoke offering in great clouds like those of Samittabhadra, we sanctify the Guru, Yidam deity, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. We sanctify the Viras, Dakinis, Dharma protectors, and wealth deities. We sanctify warrior spirits, Wormas, regional deities, and treasure keepers. We sanctify all the personal gods and powerful guardians. We sanctify the outer environment and its inhabitants into vast purity. And we offer sky treasury of inexhaustible sensory delights. Let everything be auspicious so that hindrances are pacified and all our wishes spontaneously fulfilled. Okay? So it's a nice little prayer. So let's go back through it now with a little bit of commentary on that. So the first line is, Ho, with the smoke offering, great clouds like those of Samittabhadra. So he is the universal all good, if you will, Samittabhadra. And so he is considered the unity of pure awareness, emptiness, compassion, and fundamental goodness of altruism of our true nature. And this is also considered as a primordial or universal Buddha, a manifestation, not a material being, but in our mind. Okay? So we do representations with Samittabhadra and sometimes his partner, Samittabhadri, the 2 of them together as a part of it, but it's a way of symbolism related to the ultimate nature of what we are trying to achieve. So the next line, we sanctify the Guru, who's the teacher, the Yidam deity, which is a practice form of a Buddha, and then Buddhas, awakened or liberated ones, and then Bodhisattvas, liberated beings who focus on compassion for all beings. So Bodhisattvas that's one of the significant features of that as a role. And not all people follow that, but under Tibetan Buddhism, it became more universal than it had been previously. But there are also many teachings that track back to the Pali Canon and other early sources where the Buddha actually emphasized similar kinds of things, loving kindness, compassion, and taking care of others, and so forth. So then we sanctify the Viras. Okay, so now we start getting into names of things you may not be familiar with. Viras are heroes. They symbolize the masculine principle of love and compassion. This is followed by Dakinis. They symbolize the feminine principle of wisdom or insight. And then Dharma protectors. They're enlightened beings or powerful spirits. And wealth deities. This is something, again, that was rejected by the Buddha unless it is used to benefit those in need. And then we sanctify the warrior spirits. They protect and help maintain spiritual energy. Symbolically, we visualize them as being able to do that. And then Wormas, an unusual term we don't often see, that protect the Dharmas. They're a little bit like other kinds of forms of protectors. And then regional deities. Okay, so deities literally means gods, and you see that in Tibetan Buddhism and other, even going back to the early Pali texts and so forth, we see that being brought into the tradition, even though it looks like in the earliest forms that those were things that the Buddha tended to reject. So anyway, the regional deities in this case are connected to a specific geographical area, village, or community. And so these were things that was common in India, but also in Tibet as well. And then the next one, and treasure keepers. So these are caretakers of important knowledge of the doctrines or historical secrets. So they're said to protect those kind of things. So these terms break up into more variety than what we typically use in the texts that we are using commonly. Then the next line, we sanctify all the personal gods. There's that word again, and Buddha rejected the idea of gods altogether. So the thought to have a direct individual or emotional relationship. So as a part of that, the idea was these personal gods, that we had a connection with them. The kind of thing that we see in a lot of other religions and today. And powerful guardians. So essentially the same as the treasure keepers above that protect things that we have. Then the next line, we sanctify the outer environment and its inhabitants into vast purity. So this is a boundless repository of wisdom and compassion, metaphorically as vast as the sky. So it just fills the entire sky. Oftentimes the difference between sky and space is just a slight difference of the word, not so much the meaning of its representation. So the sky is all of space, oftentimes here. And we offer sky treasury of inexhaustible sensory delights. So this symbolizes the divine abundance, purity, and transformation of worldly pleasures into spiritual wisdom. So that's a part of what Tantra is about, is taking those kind of things that the Buddha typically rejected and turning them into something that is meaningful in terms of our spiritual wisdom related to those. But I add to that, again, it's risky, okay? If we become attached to those things, then we're over the line. And then finally, let everything be auspicious or favorable, so that hindrances, things like resistance, delay, or obstruction, are pacified and all our wishes spontaneously fulfilled. That term, all our wishes, is fairly common in these texts and other similar assertions that violate those of the historical Buddha, who viewed them, as I've been saying, as barriers to liberation. But the real risk is whether you get attached to them in your mind, okay? Now, it doesn't, if you like eating a particular thing, you can like eating it, but as long as you're not attached to it. Okay, I like this particular food, and I'll have some of that, but you're not attached to it. You have it or you don't have it, those kinds of things. And so that's a part of it where it can be a little bit touchy, kind of a touch and go as to how we view them and relate to them as a part of that. So this is the brief song offering. It's spelled S-A-N-G, but it's not sang, it's song in Tibetan pronunciation. And then we recite Om Ahong, which is for the purification of body, speech, and mind, symbolizing the enlightened body, speech, and mind of all Buddhas. And then we recite that at least 3 times, or we may even do it a full mala, 108 times as a part of that. We tend to do fewer of them in most cases in our practices here, but on our own, we can go ahead and do those kind of things when we have time to do that. So that is our teaching for today. Hopefully you'll find those things helpful to you and may engage in some of those kinds of practices. They can help enrich your practices, but they can also be risky. So keep that in mind as well. So next week, we'll be beginning chapter 15, the second training of the path of Tantra meditation, the inner Yidam yogas, or highest yoga Tantra practices, the completion stage, if you will. So again, if you have any questions, you can send me those and I can respond to those or in the actual practice next time, or I can send you a reply in an email. So please abide softly and deeply in pure awareness with loving kindness and compassion for all beings, always and always. And more than ever, pray for peace. Thank you.